The conversation raises important points about societal misinterpretations of masculinity and the impact of upbringing on behavior. The host and guest explore how cultural narratives often overshadow deeper issues.
To ignore that, but concentrate entirely on the tool itself is ridiculous. Gun control is being discussed. The raising of children is not being discussed. It's gun control that's being discussed. I find that ridiculous.
The host critiques society's focus on superficial solutions rather than addressing underlying problems influencing extreme behaviors.
My career is about men doing men things, which some find silly or self-harming, but it's something built into our genome that we need to express. A segment is turned off, but you need to find a receptive audience. It's about making people realize we're not meatheads.
The guest highlights how traditional masculine activities are often misunderstood and emphasizes the importance of finding one's audience.
What would you call that? I'd say a bro, but I don't think so. It's a rapist. Yeah, a shitty human being, and most likely you have a bad relationship with your mother, or sisters, or someone who did a terrible job of expressing responsibility.
The host discusses how dysfunctional family relationships can lead to deeply ingrained misogyny.
I think your career has been about finding the right, and for both of us, it's about making people realize that, I'm not a meathead. You're not a meathead.
Both emphasize the complexity of identity, where enlightenment means acknowledging human duality beyond superficial labels.
There's some people that if I was alone with them in the woods, I would seriously think about killing them if I could get away with it. Not all lives are created equal. There's good and bad, positive and negative.
The host expresses a raw perspective on innate morality and the spectrum of human nature, reflecting on how this duality influences societal perceptions. The conversation begins with a deep dive into the sensitive nature of racial insensitivity, particularly focusing on exploitative views of athletes as mere commodities. The host and guest engage in an exchange uncovering how derogatory comments reveal much about individual mindsets.
It wouldn't get nearly the response as someone who has benefited tremendously from black athletes.
The guest outlines their experience in profiling individuals with these perspectives, using these insights both in journalism and fiction.
Yes, I've done it more in magazine articles I wrote, like profiles of people. But I've used that to move into my fictional work too.
They stress the importance of understanding others by entering their world, highlighting the emotional depth in stories like that of the amateur MMA fighter Ryan Stiles.
I find the best stories sometimes are where you don't quite make it. You know what I mean? Like athletically, it's like you put your heart and your guts and your soul into it, and you're just not quite good enough.
This theme extends to personal narratives of those who strive but never quite reach their goals, illustrating a journey full of resilience and motivation.
His father is on the Calgary SWAT team now, but he had played forever in the junior leagues of hockey. And he made it up for a cup of coffee with the Leafs for 2 games.
The guest shares stories of individuals who, despite not achieving their ultimate ambitions, contribute richly to the narrative of striving humans.
Isn't it fascinating that we have this deep, deep connection towards people that really are never going to realize their goals, and it's I feel the same way myself.
Through these stories, the conversation sheds light on the broader tapestry of life, where genuine understanding stems from accepting one's place within it, irrespective of ultimate success. The discussion explores the enduring impact of art and the swiftly evolving nature of comedy. The host and guest consider why some films remain timeless while comedy often has a short shelf life.
They still hold up today, like if you go back and watch The Hustler with Jackie Gleason. Such a good movie. Great movie. Paul Newman holds up completely today.
Comedy changes so fast. I think horror or something like The Thing, the Kurt Russell one, is as good now as it was when it was made. But comedy, there's a certain shelf life.
They discuss Lenny Bruce, a key figure who challenged societal norms at a personal cost, symbolized by his harrowing performances of reading court transcripts on stage.
Lenny Bruce, probably the most important comedian ever, went mad and would go on stage and just read transcripts of his legal proceedings.
The host humorously compares reading Margaret Atwood's work to a prison sentence, highlighting the subjective nature of art's influence.
Sounds like vomit. Sounds like if someone had to say, do you want to do a week in prison or read all of the Margaret Atwood books?
I worry because if I start reading too many noir books, suddenly that becomes my focus.
Reflecting on enjoyment versus creation, the guest emphasizes the quest for originality and authentic expression. In a reflection on life's fleeting nature, the guest and host explore the richness of living fully in the moment.
If you don't live in the moment, you're a fool because there really is no tomorrow.
The conversation turns to organisms like turtles and hydras, which experience negligible senescence but lead unremarkable lives.
Yeah, negligible senescence. But look at their lives. They're not exciting.
How about a hydra? It's biologically immortal but leads a simple life.
That's amazing. I never thought of that. Because their lives are still unremarkable.
They discuss modern interventions like hormone replacement therapy, questioning if they can enhance life quality.
TRT proponents say you're not going to live forever. It's not the body we've been gifted.
Ultimately, they conclude that wisdom comes from accepting life's impermanence, appreciating its full spectrum beyond mere survival. The conversation delves into the ethics of testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, and futuristic medical technologies in sports, balancing personal benefit and fairness while expressing both admiration and skepticism of advancements.
Of course, you don't want to abuse it. But why not take advantage of medical advancements like TRT? We fix MCLs and ACLs, so why not this too?
The guest acknowledges the challenge of maintaining fairness in sports, noting the growing accessibility of TRT through convenient applications.
Just saw an ad for underarm TRT? Swipe it on and you're good to go. It's getting so accessible.
Beyond sports, the guest humorously considers TRT's quality of life benefits for their father.
If it helps my dad feel better, why not try it? I say go for it.
The host introduces futuristic technologies like nanobots, which could reshape human recovery and blur ethical boundaries.
Imagine nanobots repairing tissue. Guys will cheat by working harder, recovering faster. Mailmen on nanobots, even. It's wild.
They speculate about extreme longevity, pondering the sensory oddities of thousand-year-old individuals.
A 2,000-year-old person? They'd smell like old papery flesh. But what if they looked amazing? Imagine Jenna Jameson in her prime but smelled like Barbara Walters.
As the conversation winds down, the host warmly promotes the guest's new book with humor.
This has been fascinating. Thanks for having me. Your new book, The Deep, is out. An audiobook too. Beautiful. Go get it, you fucks.
In a lively discussion, the focus turns to the perceived elitism in the arts, with popular figures like Stephen King facing undervaluation despite their contributions.
Yeah, it's like if you don't get this band, you're just not complex enough.
The conversation shifts to Stephen King's skill in capturing childhood, resonating with both the guest and host. King's use of a pseudonym becomes a point of intrigue, emphasizing his prolific output.
His agent said, "We can't flood the market with Stephen King," so they decided to publish under Bachman. He writes like 5,000 words a day of consistently strong stuff.
They explore how King eventually reclaimed his Bachman books, turning them into an open secret within the literary world.
That's amazing. He eventually took those Bachman books and put them under Stephen King.
The host and guest discuss King's thematic focus on writers and his connection to Maine, which serves as a rich setting for his narratives.
I've avoided writer characters, but you're right. Maine is his territory.
There's just an area with nothing between Portland and Bangor. No radio, no gas stations, just a straight shot.
This description highlights King's ability to turn geographical isolation into storytelling abundance. His setting in Maine enhances narrative depth, transforming emptiness into a creative. The conversation delves into the complexities of using a pseudonym for writing horror novels. The guest clarifies that their choice is not about shame, but about authenticity and boundary pushing.
I think maybe looking back, what we did is we settled on this pseudonym, and then I quickly went away trying to erase any sort of sentiment that I was ashamed of it. Because a lot of people in the horror genre were like, "Are you ashamed?" I'm like, fuck no.
This perspective underscores his commitment to authenticity and not yielding to external judgments about genre boundaries. He highlights the diversity in his writing, mentioning works like Rust and Bone and Cataract City. Despite varying genres, he acknowledges that his works don't fit the typical literary mold.
I wrote a book called Rust and Bone, which is like a book. Is it fiction? Yeah, short stories. And then I wrote a book just recently called Cataract City. But they certainly weren't literary, like Alice Munro or something like that. A Canadian short story writer like Salman Rushdie or Philip Roth, those kind of serious literary writers.
The host's comment on Salman Rushdie leads to a humorous reflection on societal judgments.
All I know about Salman Rushdie is a bunch of Muslims really mad at him. Is the fatwa over? Is he showing up at public functions? Poor guy.
You think about, could you imagine someone puts a fatwa on you for something you say during a podcast?
In today's internet, they can find you, but I can find you too. You could publicly expose them for their fatwa shaming.
The discussion transitions into criticizing elitist literary labels and expectations, with the guest rejecting the notion that reading certain works makes one a better person.
I feel like there's like medicine. It's not necessarily, it's good for you. There's a sense of like, you should be reading it because it's good for you and it'll make you a better person. But I'm sort of past all that now.
As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to fiction, whether it's a film or a book, I only want to be entertained.
I didn't mention it all in when I did my English degree. You won't talk about Stephen King, because you get these sort of looks like, oh, him. Oh, well, yeah, I used to read him when I was 12. After a while, you're just like, wait a sec. Fuck off. I love Stephen King.
The guest passionately defends the value of popular fiction, particularly the works of Stephen King. He challenges the elitist attitude that only highbrow literature holds value, noting how this perspective often stems from a desire to appear intellectually superior.
Base or below your esteem. And who are you in the first place? We're just sitting in some writing workshop. You haven't published a goddamn thing.
The guest likens King's ability to craft horror to a mechanic's skill with an engine, underscoring the complexity beneath what many dismiss as mere entertainment.
Stephen King wrote some really fun stuff. And deeply psychologically thrilling as well. You can't dismiss The Stand.
No, you just can't, or it...
He marvels at King's talent for capturing the essence of childhood and fear, bringing to light how King's work has profoundly influenced both readers and writers.
I read Stephen King when I was 12 and I just read him. First of all, he's the writer that got boys to read of our generation. You sort of treat the book as like an engine. The way a mechanic treats an engine, you're trying to break it down and see what is working.
It's trendy to say he sucks. It puts you in this sort of elevated category of intellectual. I think that's horseshit.
The guest criticizes the tendency to dismiss King's work as a misguided attempt to seem cultured, emphasizing the absurdity in belittling popular authors for the sake of intellectual posturing.
I don't think there's another writer, to my mind really, who writes about childhood as well as Stephen King captures it in a book like It or the movie The Body that became Stand By Me.
The conversation highlights a growing recognition of King's contributions, with references to recent admiration from figures like Patton Oswalt.
I think now there's a renaissance where people are finally like, okay, this guy's pretty good.
People love calling someone out or they love shaming someone. They love diminishing someone's work. They just enjoy it.
Ultimately, the guest advocates for a broader appreciation of literature, emphasizing that recognizing brilliance in seemingly simple narratives enriches our understanding of. In this engaging discussion, the guest and host delve into the nuances of political and religious beliefs, highlighting the complexities of a truly rounded individual. They reflect on how aligning strictly with one political camp oversimplifies human nature.
There's certain things about liberal views that get on my nerves as well. I feel like any fully rounded human being is not going to always be in one camp entirely.
Show me a young man who is not liberal, and I'll show you a man with no heart. Show me an old man who's not conservative, and I'll show you a man with no brain.
The conversation shifts to societal challenges and the resilience they build. There's a critique of the stereotype that welfare recipients are lazy, emphasizing the importance of overcoming obstacles for personal growth.
They need obstacles, and they need to overcome those obstacles. Without them, people can get lazy. Accomplishing things is part of our genetic makeup.
They explore how religious beliefs influence worldviews, discussing the irony in selective adherence to doctrines when tradition clashes with contemporary values.
My wife came up really Baptist, but decided she couldn't continue that path. It was necessary for her to make a separation from that time in her life.
If you subscribe to religion by the book, there's a massive disconnect with reality. The Earth is said to be 6,000 years old, but we find evidence contradicting that.
Humor emerges as they highlight the contradictions in strict religious adherence, pointing out how some followers overlook guidelines against tattoos while condemning others.
You're not supposed to have religious tattoos, but people overlook that. It's funny how hardcore Christians criticize Scientology, yet ignore their own book's odd stories.
Ultimately, they argue for a broader perspective, urging others to question and reflect on these disparities, emphasizing the value of experiences over rigid assumptions. The discussion opens with a critique of societal views toward masculinity, highlighting the discomfort with traditional masculine figures in media. The guest recalls backlash against shows like Fear Factor and UFC as examples of this discomfort.
I remember when Fear Factor came out, people acted like society was collapsing. Why were we getting people to eat bugs?
The guest sees these reactions as symptomatic of a broader trend to reject manliness, likening it to scripts avoiding masculine characters.
And whether you like him or not, that's an element of our society. Why purposely ignore them?
The host shares personal experiences of working with the UFC and being judged for it, equating this criticism to a misunderstanding of martial arts.
When I started working for the UFC, people talked to me like I was ruining my career. It's just martial arts.
There's a condemnation of how masculinity is tied to negative behaviors, emphasizing that participating in masculine activities doesn't equate to destructive actions.
It was like masculinity gets tied into all the reprehensible aspects of male behavior. Men love shooting guns, but that doesn't mean they want to kill people.
The conversation then shifts to overmedication and its potential role in violence.
Whenever there's a school shooting, they say take away the guns. Maybe stop giving people drugs that make them psychotic. Over 90% of school shooters are overmedicated.
A balanced view is sought as both acknowledge medication's role in mental health, advocating for careful discernment.
I have friends who've benefited greatly from antidepressants. It's not about denying them, but finding the right place for them.
The conversation unveils a complex interaction between recognition and engagement. The guest reflects on his experiences with bullies, noting their ability to sense his willingness to engage in confrontation.
And I always got the sense afterwards that the person who beat me up basically knew it. Knew that they're like, I can draw Davidson into a fight, and he'll willingly go in. He'll go into the bear trap, and then I'll be able to beat him up.
Despite enduring such conflicts, the guest highlights that the harassment eventually ceased after physical confrontations.
The only good thing about it ultimately is that the picking on stuff stopped. You know what I mean? But I had to take a beating in order to sort of affect that.
That's a weird psychological sort of relationship between the bully and the person who gets picked on.
The conversation shifts to the distinction between bullies and true fighters. The guest makes clear that genuine fighters avoid exploiting those less skilled.
I feel like the real true fighters wouldn't even do something like that. They would recognize, well, you know, this guy. I'm not gonna bother with this guy.
The guest recounts a vivid story from high school, describing how a simple basketball game escalated into a fight, highlighting the unpredictability.
Here's sort of a story of one of my worst beatings. I was at the YMCA. Me and my brother were playing basketball. I was probably like 16, 17, 18. That was my last year of high school, probably.
During the game, tensions unexpectedly surged, orchestrating a scenario where the guest was forced into a fight despite no prior provocation.
We were getting close to beating him, and I turn around and I see the ball. It's whipping right at my face. And I turn my head, and it sort of goes by the side of my head and just gives me a scalp burn, basically.
The encounter concludes outside amidst ice and cold, where the guest faced an opponent with martial arts expertise.
So I ended up outside. It's winter in Canada, and there's ice on the sidewalk. And I face up in what I assume is somewhat of a fighting posture, and he kicks me in the head.
He shares a memory of a violent incident with a lacrosse player enforcer, underscoring the unforeseen nature of conflict.
And I remember being like face down and there's like ice melt on the street. You know, those blue crystals they put down, you know? And my face is pressed into it. And thankfully it goes on for a while. Clearly I'm beat.
Discovery of the assailant's severe mental health issues adds another layer to the story.
So my brother goes inside, gets my clothes. We go. I find out later this guy, lacrosse is a big sport in our country. And he was like the enforcer on the lacrosse team. So he was a tough guy. And then my buddy calls me up a couple years later. He says, "Did you hear about so-and-so?" I said no. I was away at university at this point. He's like, they went camping in the woods. And him and his dad, and this is where it gets back to your idea of abuse. He stabbed his dad 44 times. Killed him.
The host connects this to broader societal issues, emphasizing hidden battles many face in silence.
Well, I always try to explain that to someone who gives people the finger in a car. Like, you never know who you're giving the finger to. Exactly. My wife has a bad habit of honking the horn. I'm like, baby, I love you, but don't do it. You don't know who the hell's stepping out of that freaking car. Not only that, you never know what state they're in.
He further elaborates on studies of population density affecting behavior, highlighting how environments can influence emotional states.
They've done these studies on population density just with rats. And they've shown how bizarre rat behavior gets when you get too many rats in a contained environment, and it mirrors human beings' behavior.
Their conversation paints a compelling picture of the necessity for empathy and understanding in a world full of The conversation dives into the challenging pursuit of a career in combat sports, highlighting the physical and mental toll it takes on athletes.
The real issue with putting all of your eggs in one basket in life, and that basket being athletics, especially combat athletics.
A successful career in combat sports is rare due to its damaging preparation.
To become a champion, you have to be a crazy person who's obsessed with nothing but that, and that will take over your life.
The guest emphasizes the critical roles of genetics and psychology, acknowledging that these alone might not secure victory. They explore personal insights gained through competition.
He made that guy see something about himself. He got that close to him that the other guys sort of recognized I'm a frail. I'm made out of the same crumbling stuff that he's made out of.
The journey of self-discovery is seen as a victory, valuing the revelation of personal limits.
That's fascinating because to me, if you say that someone can get so close they could test someone, that means that they could beat them.
The discussion centers on hormone manipulation and its implications for athletes. The conversation delves into the ethical issues in sports, particularly the use of hormone therapies to enhance performance.
You can manipulate your hormones to give you an advantage over non-manipulated people.
This practice raises ethical concerns regarding fairness and long-term health risks when competing against younger athletes. This is especially problematic with potential cheating.
In the UFC, you cannot have testosterone replacement. No one can have it anymore.
Research from Dr. Mark Gordon highlights hormonal impacts from traumatic brain injuries, not just aging.
I think there's too much possibility of cheating. It's a real concern in sports.
The conversation highlights the balance between adaptation and integrity in sports, emphasizing the role of ethical considerations as science progresses. The discussion shifts to Canadian sports culture and masculinity. The host talks about Maine's beauty and solitude.
Maine, they love it. It's beautiful. They have everything. Deer and moose. It's probably one of the least populated states.
Attention then turns to Montreal, known for its cultural diversity and influence in MMA.
I love Montreal. A lot of great MMA fighters are francophone, like GSP and Patrick Cote. The TriStar Gym from Montreal is one of the best in the world.
The discussion explores Canada's sports enthusiasm, from MMA to the Toronto Raptors, portraying a nation passionate about athletics.
We sell out the Air Canada Centre. We are a great sporting nation. The Raptors just got bounced from the playoffs.
They contrast perceptions of masculinity in Canada and the US, noting cultural differences in embracing traditional traits.
Canada just has a love for all things manly, whereas in America, there's a lot of embarrassment about things manly.
This exchange forms a cycle of cultural influence, shaping global sports and cultural identities. The focus shifts to the realities of fighting careers. Prominent champions like GSP, Silva, and Jones overshadow many fighters.
We'd think differently of so many fighters if GSP hadn't existed, or Silva, or John Jones.
Challenges abound as legends like Cain Velasquez exemplify endurance, underscoring the energy dynamics in fights.
Mexicans are known for that grit. There's some of the toughest fighters, like Julio Cesar Chavez, who just wouldn't stop until you dropped.
With a focus on resilience, cultural attributes add layers to fighter stories.
On a long enough timeline, any fighting stories usually can be a tragic one.
Retirement brings its own challenges, with fighters often needing external intervention to retire at the right time.
No, Chuck Liddell definitely didn't know when to stop. He only stopped because Dana White intervened. Fighters just have this belief in themselves.
The conversation turns to podcast promotions, where the host's charisma shines through with vibrant deals and future guest teasers.
Thanks also to 1-800-Flowers.com. Get vibrant multicolored roses with a free vase. And upcoming, Tim Kennedy, a fascinating...
The conversation delves into writing under a pseudonym and its significance in the horror genre.
My pal Matt Stagg sends me this book and he's like, dude, you got to read this. It's messed up and right up your alley.
Intrigued by the book's style reminiscent of Stephen King's work, the host's curiosity leads him to ask the guest about the pseudonym, Nick Cutter.
When he sent it to me, he mentioned Nick Cutter wasn't your real name. What's the deal there?
I grew up like you, loving Stephen King. My agent suggested a pseudonym to separate my horror work from more literary pieces and to avoid confusion.
The guest elaborates on how his agent's advice led to the purposeful separation of his works, allowing him to delve deeply into the horror genre without constraint.
When I wrote The Troop, it was about capturing that 80s-style horror. Just straightforward, inspired by what I grew up loving.
By choosing a pseudonym, the guest carved out a unique space for his horror writing, allowing him to pay homage to his influences while crafting stories that resonate with contemporary audiences.
It was about having clarity and embracing the genre without blending it with my other work.
This thoughtful choice reflects a larger theme of understanding one's origins and influences, while also paving the way for independent exploration. The conversation today delves into the intricate blend of storytelling and factual accuracy.
You just need to be one step ahead of your reader. I had someone contact me about